Have you ever been told exactly what you needed to hear and still felt unsatisfied? Have you ever walked away from an apology feeling more unseen than before it? When someone says, "I love you," after hurting you, do you actually feel safer or just more conflicted? In today's episode, we're going to talk about why verbal repair without behavioral coherence is just an emotionally intelligent way of staying in power without changing. Meaning why emotional acknowledgment without behavioral transformation keeps you stuck in insecure attachment and trauma patterning in your relationships. And we're also going to talk about how to tell when love is real, regulated, and repair capable. Conflict is a natural part of all relationships, but most of us were not modeled or taught how to move through conflict in a healthy, mutually empowering, and regulated way. Most of us never witnessed genuine repair. We witnessed placating, self-abandonment, fawning, avoidance, performance through codependent relationships that showed us that saying "I love you" or "I'm sorry" is enough for relational resolution. But it's not. That's why you still feel hurt or tense after someone says, "I'm sorry," or "I love you," or "you're right." That's why someone can say the right thing and you can remain angry, resentful, disappointed, unsatisfied, and continue to brace. Because the truth is, in relationship, we don't feel safe because someone says the right thing. We feel safe when someone moves toward us and shows up differently in relationship without us prompting them, meaning without us reminding, begging for, reinforcing, manipulating, or controlling their behavioral change. For many people, relational resentment accumulates because true repair and resolution never occurs. And low-grade resentment that lives in the background just becomes normal. And that's why you have the same fight over and over, just in different ways. Even though you've both apologized, you've heard "I love yous," "I get it now," "that wasn't fair to you." And in that moment, part of you wants to exhale, but the rest of you is actually still bracing, still tracking them, still waiting for something else to happen, still wanting to feel whole, body safe, not just mentally appeased. So this episode is about why the right words can be said in relationship, but nothing improves in the relationship on a fundamental level. That gap between verbal recognition and behavioral coherence that your nervous system is very attuned to. Why conflict or rupture stays unresolved, even when emotional intelligence or sincere apology are present. Welcome to The Simple Source, a paradigm-shifting space where self-love, healing, spirituality, and personal growth are redefined. If you've been told healing takes years, that abundance must be attracted, or that transformation requires struggle, you haven't been told the truth. I'm Villines, a certified, trauma-informed holistic coach, author, and spiritual guide. After healing myself from chronic conditions, complex trauma, and lack, not by following traditional frameworks, but by creating my own, I'm now teaching you to love, heal, and free yourself, mind, body, and soul, so you can reclaim your highest health, happiness, and potential with joy and ease. Each week, we go beyond surface-level self-help and into the real mechanics of transformation. If the traditional paths to healing and spirituality haven't produced the changes you want in the life you desire, you're in the right place. You were never meant to struggle or wait for what is already yours. Let's get started with today's episode. For people with unresolved relational and attachment trauma, verbal repair can feel like closeness, but if it isn't followed by real, sovereign, initiated movement and behavioral coherence, it is actually a stalling mechanism, consciously or unconsciously, because it's kind of like an emotional placeholder. It buys you both time, it sounds loving, it may appear evolved depending on the level of maturity of the person, but it's not true repair, it's not true resolution. And your body knows that, not because your body is too sensitive, but because your nervous system is tracking relational safety, not emotional performance or appeasement. So if you're in a relationship right now, romantic, familial, professional, where someone keeps saying the right things, but you still feel resentful or hurt or agitated, and the relationship has cyclical issues, what we're talking about in this episode is a very large contributing factor to that. So know that there is a valid reason that you don't feel safe after hearing words of affirmation, why you still feel alone in the labor of holding the relationship together, why you still feel responsible for managing the connection or the conflict and for being quote unquote understanding. All of that is very exhausting, and you don't have to put up with it anymore. Maybe you've been in a 5-year relationship where every conflict ends in the same rupture, right? You guys apologize, maybe you reflect, tell each other you're committed, you love each other, whatever, but nothing truly resolves because the conflict just surfaces again in another way. But if you stop initiating repair, nothing happens. There's avoidance or just trying to pretend that everything is fine. And you never experience holistic mutual safety or total resolution of the root of the rupture, because love in those instances was performative, not reparative. So throughout this episode, we're going to look at exactly why verbal repair feels good in the moment, but doesn't facilitate lasting change in your relational dynamics. Why emotional mirroring without movement becomes a kind of spiritual bypass, and how to recognize the difference between being acknowledged and actually being met. Because the truth is, real repair isn't poetic, it's not really romantic in the cinematic sense, it's embodied, it's somatic. And when you can love consciously with maturity, interdependence, and without conditions, you can move through resolution, not just hover around it. So let's start by talking about why words of affirmation can feel so relieving in the moment and still leave you feeling unsafe afterward. Most of us were conditioned very early to equate soothing language with safety, because in our earliest relationships, emotional attunement was inconsistent. So when connection was unpredictable and thus stressful, even like a small sign of care, like a gentle tone, an apology, a moment of understanding, felt like relief. It felt like love. So then your nervous system learned, this is what love is, this is as good as it gets. Now, in attachment terms, this shows up in very specific ways. So if you lean toward anxious attachment, verbal reassurance can feel essential, right? Hearing, I care about you, I'm not leaving, or I get what you're saying now. All of that can temporarily quiet the anxiety, the insecurity, even if nothing in the relationship actually shifts. Now, that relief is real, but it's short-lived because the dynamic in the relationship hasn't actually changed. And so if you lean toward avoidant attachment, that pattern looks a little different. So safety gets mistaken for emotional distance that looks stable, right? You may rely on relational explanations, calm tones, or a neutral demeanor because those feel controlled and low conflict. And from the outside, it can seem grounded or mature, but beneath that stillness, there's usually a refusal to move. There's presence, but not pursuit, meaning you don't initiate repair unless it's specifically asked for. And that lack of movement is often framed as being like respectful or regulated, but in truth, it's just a protective strategy to avoid emotional vulnerability or relational accountability. So both patterns come from the same root. Early relationships where emotional attunement was unreliable, where you had to adapt to maintain connection. People pleasing and conflict avoidance are not personality traits. They're old survival strategies that were born from you learning to smooth things over, to accept partial repair, and to convince yourself that that was enough because asking or pushing for more meant risking disconnection, losing love. So when someone later offers you kind words or acknowledgement, especially in a thoughtful or an eloquent way, it activates that early conditioning. Your nervous system registers it as a sign of care. And then again, it briefly relaxes and you may feel or think, see, they do care about me. But at the same time, another part of you stays guarded, right? Because you're still bracing, because it actually recognizes the whole pattern. Because your nervous system actually anticipates the whole pattern, which is incomplete resolution, meaning the disconnection remains. So in your past, words didn't actually create safety. They just reduced tension without changing the relational environment, meaning they didn't resolve the moment of the disconnection or the emotional distress or the relational instability. They just made things quieter momentarily for a short time. And so when you have been starved of real emotional presence, even that small recognition can feel like love, even if it's not followed by change later. And if all you've known is inconsistency, even inconsistency wrapped in kind words will feel like connection until you stop mistaking being seen for being safe. But your body will always know the difference. Now, if your love language is words of affirmation, all of this might land kind of uncomfortably for you. But what this episode is explaining and offers you is actually permission for you to trust the part of you that didn't feel safe, even when the language was there. So to be clear, I'm not diminishing or dismissing the impact of language. I'm actually honoring how important it is. But I'm highlighting a layer of truth that many people whose love language is primarily words of affirmation just miss. And that truth is, even when the words are right, you can still feel alone. And forgiving someone because they sounded like they got it does not actually serve your highest self and nervous system. All right, let me explain. For people whose love language is words of affirmation, you've likely spent decades tuning into tone, into phrasing, into the rhythm of someone's voice to feel safe. Maybe because growing up, words were the only sign of love that you could count on, or they were the only thing that ever softened conflict. So now, even when something doesn't feel quite right, hearing I love you or I'm sorry brings, again, that temporary relief. But here's what your system already knows that you may not consciously understand. Words can soothe you without ever securing you. Words can be sincere and still not be repair. Language can soothe and still not resolve. Someone can say, I love you, and still refuse to move and take meaningful action. Words can sound and feel beautiful and still be a delay tactic. They can come from sincerity and still lead nowhere. So this is not about training yourself to need fewer words. It's actually about raising your standards, upgrading your system from words as reassurance to words as reflection of embodied change, from emotional performance to relational integrity and coherence. Because your body deserves to feel safe, not just your mind needs to feel understood. And so the most loving words mean nothing if they are not backed by action that makes your openness feel safe, not like something you have to earn. So unless the words are matched by meaningful movement, your body's not going to relax fully, because real love makes openness feel natural, not conditional. And openness matters because it is the signal, the somatic signal of safety. It's the gateway to real connection, to nervous system regulation, to relational coherence. Because without openness, there's no true intimacy. There's only management, pretense, performance. And openness is what allows mutuality, meaning you cannot receive love, care, or truth unless you are open to it. And you cannot offer real love free from conditionality or defense unless you're open yourself. So without openness, relationships become transactional, where each person manages the other's reactivity, trying not to be activated or to activate. you're just stuck in subtle emotional withholding, and that's not healthy. So for those of you who thrive on words, I'm not telling you to stop valuing verbal affirmations. I'm telling you to anchor them into behavior, to require congruence, and to honor when your body says no, even if your ears hear yes. Because I love you should feel like stability, not like a reset button. And when someone says, I hear you, that should be followed by movement, not silence. So words are not inherently safe unless your relational field is safe. So this episode doesn't invalidate words of affirmation. It liberates them from being weaponized, misused, or overvalued in relationships where nothing actually changes. All right, so let's talk directly about the trauma side of this. What happens when you hear nice words, but nothing else follows? So your nervous system, especially if it's been shaped by trauma, will often interpret verbal acknowledgement as like a green light when the tone is soft or when the language feels resonant, maybe even like evolved, spiritual. And for a moment, it may feel like something has shifted. But again, if there's no movement, meaning no transformative behavioral re-entry from the other person, no embodied repair, your system will start to split, like somatically. And that's going to create a lot of internal confusion because your mind here is resolution, but your body is still bracing. And that is not dysfunction. That's actually just your system's intelligence, because your system isn't just listening to words. It's actually primarily tracking patterns. It's tracking coherence. It's tracking your relational field. And if nothing in the relational environment has actually changed, your body is not going to change either. So this is where fawn and appease responses are often misread as healing or resolution. When someone says all the right things, especially in relationships with a lot of emotional inconsistency, your nervous system may default to submission. Like you go quiet, you soften, you stop asking for more. Not because you genuinely feel safe, but because your body is trying to protect the connection. It's survival. It's not real clarity. It's not repair. And so, that moment when you think, okay, maybe they get it now, that's not always a breakthrough. More often, it's strategic compliance, meaning your system calculates that it's safer to settle than to stay in intensity to resolve the rupture. And this is why people with unresolved relational trauma can override their own truth. When you have been conditioned to accept acknowledgement in place of change, asking for more can feel selfish or even unsafe. And then you start to question whether what you felt was even real. You question whether you're being too sensitive or too demanding. And so you can confuse kind words with repair. And that confusion creates like a split inside of you where one part feels temporarily relieved, right? Just grasping for hope. Okay, I hope this is going to get better. And then the other part knows that nothing is actually different. So that's why it's so important to understand that your trauma, when unresolved, is going to try to convince you that acknowledgement is resolution. But again, your body always knows the difference. So healing that pattern isn't about demonizing words or language. It requires tracking whether those words are paired with meaningful movement, whether they're coherent with behavior, whether they actually shift your relational field and dynamics without you having to explain, to guide, to relax or soften first. And if the words don't, right, if they're not met with behavioral change that you don't have to manipulate, your body is going to continue to feel unsafe. Not because you are being dramatic or because there's something wrong with you. It's just because your body is honest, right? Your body is not going to lie. So if your body doesn't feel settled after someone says the quote unquote right thing, what then is it actually reacting to? It's actually picking up on whether their actions match their words, whether they're just repeating your feelings back to you, or actually showing up in a new way. And that's the real difference. Someone can mirror your emotions without changing anything on their end. But when someone has real relational integrity, you can feel it because they move toward you in the relationship without needing to be told to. So emotional mirroring is when someone reflects your feelings back to you, right? They name your pain, they affirm your feelings, your reality. They might even do it in super sexy language. And in that moment, it can feel like connection. But it stops at the surface because it's not backed by change or movement. It just stays in the realm of acknowledgement. It never becomes action. Now, relational integrity is different. It's not about saying the right thing. It's about doing the aligned thing. It means that the other person notices the rupture and then takes responsibility without needing you to explain it first. They move with their own sovereignty. They choose differently. They show you through action that the connection matters to them without needing you to provide more evidence or you prompting them or more of your emotional labor. And this is something unconscious that needs to become conscious. When someone mirrors your emotions with precision or accuracy or readiness, but refuses to actually change, you do experience a betrayal of integrity and relational coherence. Their words may say, I see you, but their behavior says, but you're still on your own. And yeah, that's fucking confusing in relationships. It's destabilizing. And if you have unresolved trauma, it can feel like gaslighting even when it's not intentional because it makes you question your own sense of reality. So the distinction is emotional mirroring reflects and relational integrity reorients. Only one actually shifts your relationship into mutual coherence. So now, if you have been mirrored without meaningful movement long enough, eventually you're likely going to stop expecting anything more. You're just going to settle for that. And that's not because you're naive or, again, like there's something wrong with you. It's just because you were conditioned through attachment wounds and trauma to interpret emotional expression as change, even when nothing changes or shifts. So in insecure or trauma-bonded relationships, your nervous system doesn't just look for safety, it starts performing it to maintain it. Like you become the one who constantly monitors the emotional dynamics. You track every shift in their tone, every pause in a text, every slight change in their energy. You start to anticipate conflict, and then you do whatever it takes to prevent it by smoothing over your discomfort, by avoiding your own truth, by softening your own needs. And so that doesn't come from any real sense of peace. You're just managing yourself and you're managing the relationship to survive. Here's an example of that, okay? Let's say you start to sense that your partner is pulling away. They haven't said anything directly about their feelings, but you notice they're getting quieter, maybe their texts are shorter, maybe they start to be less affectionate toward you. And instead of you asking directly what's going on or you expressing how that change in behavior is affecting you, you shift into emotional service mode, right? That means you overcompensate by complimenting them. You then start initiating more connection. And meanwhile, you continue to downplay your own discomfort. You just try to be easier, more chill, more accommodating, not because you feel secure, but because you are afraid that if you show up in your truth, they're going to leave. And that's not emotional intimacy. That's nervous system management in reaction to instability. And that is what keeps trauma bonds alive long after they initially feel good and like a meaningful connection. And this is especially true if your early relationships required you to be the translator, meaning you had to be the one who felt everything and explained everything to someone else who felt nothing. You were the one who initiated repair, even when you were not the one who harmed the connection. And so if you don't heal your early relational attachment traumas and wounds, of course that pattern is still going to be active as an adult. That's why you confuse connection with responsibility, survival with love, and why relational stagnation feels normal, right? As long as someone can emotionally reflect you. Now, the truth is, if you're always the one restoring relational harmony and coherence, you're not in a healthy relationship. You're in an emotionally laboring relationship where you're doing more than what is fair to you. And love that costs you your center, that controls you through language and avoidance and compromises your well-being is not healthy love. It's unhealed patterns playing out in relationship. Now, I want to talk about a specific pattern that a lot of people don't even realize that they're enacting or involved in. Is sometimes someone says all the right things, they express care, concern, they affirm your experience, but they only show up after you reopen the door, so to speak, meaning after you regulate, you soften, you make reconnection safe again for them. Now, that doesn't make that person bad, broken, even necessarily emotionally unavailable, but it does reveal something important, which is that they are not initiating from presence. They're responding to your effort. And that difference really matters because healthy, real love does not wait for you to feel safe first. It doesn't stall until you've cleaned up your shit, your part of the rupture, until you've translated what happened in your dynamic, until you have signaled that it's okay to come close again. Healthy, real love tracks that disconnection and then moves toward it without needing permission. And when it doesn't, that doesn't mean, again, that the other person is necessarily being overtly manipulative or malicious. Often what it means is that they've just learned to equate emotional stillness with safety. They're just protecting themselves by not connecting with you. But if that protection means that you are always the one repairing, reopening, or keeping the relationship afloat, it turns into a silent leverage. And that's where the harm happens, because love that consistently waits for you to re-engage is not rooted in shared responsibility. It's rooted in emotional management. And that pattern is unsustainable. That's why you harbor a lot of resentment, get angry really quickly, conflicts surface really easily. Because real repair is mutual. Real movement is responsive, not coerced. And real love does not need you to collapse in order to feel safe enough to take action. All right, so now I want to talk about how you know when repair is real. So repair is real, not because the words sound good, but because your body reorients towards safety without effort. Meaning you do not have to guide the conversation. You didn't have to over-explain yourself or why you're still hurting. The tension resolves naturally. Your chest will naturally soften. Your breath will naturally deepen. Your body will release tension. Not because you have mentally decided to forgive or move on, but because the situation itself legitimately became safe again. Real repair leaves a somatic imprint. It has a somatic effect, positive somatic effect. And real repair isn't something that you reason your way into. It's something you feel. It's just like healing, right? It's really very similar. And it doesn't require analysis or convincing because your body will automatically let go when the other person's actions align with safety and the relational environment has actually changed. But when the repair is just verbal, when there's no meaningful movement, your body knows that because there's a disorientation somatically. You may feel seen, but not settled. And so then your gut will still stay tight, or your heart will feel like it's still guarded. And then afterward, you feel emotionally exhausted or conflicted, not restored, not resolved. So if your body still doesn't feel safe after the apology, if you're still bracing, if you're still confused or unsettled, it wasn't real repair. It wasn't holistic, somatic level resolution. Your system may have recognized the words as familiar or comforting, but safety is not created by language. I've said this in so many various ways over and over again throughout this podcast because it's true. A lot of people think that you just heal yourself by talking to yourself, understanding yourself through insight. But healing is deeply somatic because it's about feeling safe, not thinking about being safe. And all of that is created by behavioral change in relationship, by meaningful relational movement, by the restoration of coherence without you having to ask, beg, or remind for it. So remember, your body doesn't lie. Even when your mind wants to believe that things are better, your nervous system is going to keep track of what's actually going on, if there's change or no change. And if nothing has changed, if real repair and resolution did not occur, your body is going to tell you that. Now, what does real repair actually look like then? When it's not reactive, not codependent, not waiting on you to lead. It looks like someone who's present enough to notice the rupture on their own. And it's going to sound like emotional maturity that does not rely on your cues or your level of comfort to then be followed by initiated action. It's when someone takes responsibility and accountability, not because they feel guilty, not because they feel pressured, not because you demanded it, but because the connection matters to them. And they're attuned enough to move without needing you to tell them to move or without needing to be asked. So real repair sounds like, I circled back because I realized I pulled away and that matters. Or here's what I'm going to do differently starting right now. Or you don't have to explain that to me. I already took steps to make it right on my end. Or I could feel something shifted in us and I wanted to meet you in that shift, not wait for you to bring it up. So here I am. And so to be clear, none of that is overfunctioning. None of that happens out of obligation. And none of that is performative. And if it is, it's not real repair. Real repair is mature, interdependent, conscious. It's accountable love. Love that does not collapse under discomfort and does not use emotional reflection as a substitute for real change. So to be clear, real repair regulates your body without you forcing it. It rebuilds safety without needing to dissect the past ad nauseum. It doesn't rush you, pressure you, or require you to explain your pain to be valid. It meets both people's systems, not just the one doing the most emotional labor. And it doesn't pacify you, it actually resolves the disconnection. And it doesn't demand it doesn't demand openness. It creates the condition where openness becomes effortless again. Because in emotionally safe, embodied love, repair is not a reaction to rupture. It's a natural part of the relational rhythm. It's what love does when it is healthy and pure of its own accord. So I hope that this episode gave you more insight about healthy repair and why words of affirmation can feel hollow. I hope it has given you permission to stop emotionally laboring for love, permission to stop translating your needs into something more palatable just to keep a connection intact, and permission to stop accepting presence without pursuit, words without movement, or care without coherence. You are allowed to want relationships to choose you back, not just in sentiment, but in action. And I hope you trust your body as the authority, not on who says the right things, but on who actually makes love feel safe again. Understanding and practicing healthy conflict repair is not optional. It is foundational. Without it, even the most loving relationships will quietly erode from unresolved tension and resentment, emotional misattunement, and one-sided labor imbalances. It's not just unresolved rupture that causes harm, it's the absence of meaningful movement and change afterward. And so I hope this episode gives you an embodied framework for what real resolution is, not just what it sounds like, but what it feels like in your body. Because relational repair is not just about tending to conflict or learning how to disagree better. It's about restoring safety, rebuilding mutual trust, and creating a relationship that can hold both people's nervous systems, not just one. All right, so here's your action step for the week. I want you to do an emotional labor audit. So make a list somewhere on a piece of paper, on your notes, wherever. Make a list of every relationship where you are the one that has to always name the disconnection or the conflict or the rupture first, where you have to initiate repair, or you have to explain what's wrong, or you have to be the one to soften first in order for reconnection to happen. And then after you make that list, I want you to circle the relationships where that has been the ongoing pattern. And then I want you to honestly ask yourself this question. If I stopped managing the connection, would it survive? Would they show up on their own, or would it quietly fall apart without my effort? And the answer to that question is going to help you gain clarity about where your energy is being used efficiently versus where it's being used up detrimentally, where you've been confused between being loved and being responsible for keeping a relationship alive, and where it's time to stop adjusting your standard to fit the dynamic and start choosing dynamics that actually rise to meet you. Loving yourself is the most powerful way to be loved in relationship because it teaches your nervous system what safety feels like before anyone else comes into the picture. Because when you stop abandoning yourself to keep other people comfortable, when you stop negotiating your truth just to maintain a connection, you naturally change a relational dynamic because you show up differently. You're more empowered, more resourced, more aligned with your highest self and your highest truth. And knowing what you deserve and then demanding that, not just from someone else, but from yourself. Meaning you also take meaningful action to make sure your body experiences healthy repair and resolution and love is, of course, the kind of self-love that fosters radically different, more aligned love in your relationships. Because when you stop settling in relationships, you are going to be met with people who can actually meet you, not because you finally became more lovable, because you are perfectly lovable exactly as you are right now, but because you finally started loving yourself in ways that enforce the standard for what pure true love can be. Thank you so much for being here today. I hope this episode awakened you, inspired you, and reminded you of what's possible when you love, heal, and free yourself and reclaim your highest truth and power. If this show has transformed or enlightened your self-love, growth, and healing journey, please like, save, and share this episode and leave a positive review on Apple or Spotify. And subscribe to be reminded of new episodes. Your support is deeply appreciated and truly helps this show so much. And if today's episode resonated with you, don't stop here. Go deeper. My book, Unconditional, You Are Perfect As You Are, expands on these teachings and gives you the missing framework about self-love that no one is talking about. So get your copy today to start reading and loving yourself more. And if you're ready for the ultimate healing journey with daily instruction and guidance from me, I'd love to see you inside the Source membership, the only holistic and comprehensive step-by-step self-healing program that is proven to work. Remember, you were never meant to struggle or wait for what is already yours. It's time to claim everything you want and more. All the links are in the show notes. I'll see you next time.